Hi, this is I'm on your side, Cora Stack here. I wanted just to continue this. I've been thinking about this again for many, many years, and I have to give credit to all the top, the very generous psychologists on YouTube who have agreed to be interviewed, or who have YouTube channels and who have shared their knowledge of psychology hugely with the world. And you don't see this with other disciplines really, compared to psychology. So there's a huge generosity in many psychologists, even though, we're hearing that there's narcissism in psychology as well. So, it's everywhere, as people are saying. So when people are saying narcissism is everywhere, it's time to take stock. So can society change what psychology alone cannot? So all of these psychologists who are on YouTube are really trying to help the wider public understand what it's all about and the harm that it's created. And all you can do is to look at all of the comments that various individuals write down, in thousands or in hundreds of thousands. And these could be representing billions or millions of people worldwide who are destroyed by narcissism, which is very rarely discussed by politicians. And people say politicians themselves have become narcissistic. And a recent interview there with Channel 4 suggested that the AI, the AI technocrats themselves started off with the best of intentions and have become this way. So what's changed in these people? And this doesn't just happen to AI technocrats. It seems to happen, as Dr. Phil would say, to a lot of people in the CEO or in professions and medicine and law enforcement and all these places. There's a huge problem with narcissism and narcissistic abuse and lack of accountability. So can society change what psychology alone cannot? Part two: power, accountability, and a new theory of narcissistic abuse. Now, I have to commend all of the psychologists that have helped educate me and inform me, and their backstory, and kind of bringing that to the frontier. So, this paper should appear shortly on my usual academic platforms. I would describe it as a paper that challenges some of the existing discourse around narcissism and narcissistic abuse, not by rejecting psychology. In fact, I've been hugely informed by it, but by arguing that psychology alone may be too narrow a framework for understanding how serious harm develops, persists, and becomes entrenched. The central question is this: what happens if the narcissistic individual does not change? And when I'm talking about narcissistic, I'm talking about dark tetroid, right up to the dark tetroid, that pattern of behaviors here. It's just a word to describe, all of this, the complete spectrum, if you like. Psychology has spent a great deal of time asking whether deeply narcissistic traits can be treated, modified, or transformed. And this is an important question, and they're often asked that by podcasters. But this is not the only question, because even where psychological change is very difficult, society still has choices. And this came out in a recent podcast there on Channel 4. That I thought was again very insightful. We can ask, why is the harmful behaviour succeeding? What power allows it to succeed? What is rewarding it? Why are people afraid to challenge it? People are terrified. They're terrified of challenging all of this. Why are institutions not intervening earlier? And perhaps most importantly, can we change the environment around the behaviour even when we cannot guarantee change in the individual? So I see that if the environment is influencing the pathology of the individual, until we change the environment, it's very unlikely we're going to change the pathology or the behavior of the individual. The other way around. You see, this is the way I'm looking at it now, from just doing all my research and thinking. This is the central argument of this paper: moving beyond narcissism as an individual psychological problem. Narcissistic abuse is usually, now and I'm talking about, the dark tetroid, the sadism, the Machiavellian, all of those elements to it, in this, the narcissism people are saying we're, you know, it's going beyond its boundaries in inverted commas. Narcissistic abuse is usually discussed at the level of the individual. We examine personality, lack of empathy, entitlement, manipulation, gaslighting, grandiosity, vulnerability, defensiveness, and responses to criticism. All of this matters, but harmful behaviour does not occur in a vacuum. It occurs inside families, it occurs in workplaces, it occurs in institutions, say healthcare, in universities, in organizations, it occurs in professions, and in particular, it occurs within systems of power. Once power enters the picture, the problem changes. And indeed, the person changes, it seems to me. A difficult personality with little authority can cause considerable interpersonal distress. Would that be myself? Well, I'm a challenging. I'm regarded as difficult because I speak to power. I challenge power. No. A similarly difficult personality. This is possibly from a paper that I've read over and over again from The Guardian on the culture of cruelty in higher education. So a similar difficult personality with control over money, employment, career progression, reputation, information, housing, professional opportunities, or institutional process. I mean, look at all the control there. Maybe, or medicine, surgery, that was mentioned. It's shocking, really. You'll be very careful now for your next procedure. Check out the pathology of the surgeon, may be capable of far greater harm. So one of the central propositions in this paper is power can act as a multiplier. And we have that, various kind of multipliers in mathematics of harmful behavior. Why diagnosis should not be the barrier. The paper also argues strongly that society should not become obsessed or preoccupied with diagnosis, because once that happens, it's a gateway to closing down the discussion. It's brilliant, really, that. So we do not need organizations trying to decide who's a narcissist. I mean, every second person is saying so-and-so's a narcissist, so-and-so's a narcissist. Who's a psychopath, who has particularly Well, I mean, talking about personality disorders is a way for institutions to knock that and to say, we can't deal with that. So this could become extremely dangerous. The paper proposes something more practical. Behavior. I mean, we can all examine and spot behavior. Behavior must become first. What is the person actually doing? Are they intimidating others? Are they retaliating when challenged? Are they manipulating information? Are they repeatedly humiliating people? Are they exploiting dependents? Exploitation is a huge part of narcissism. Are they obstructing careers? Are they abusing authority? Abuse of power is a huge part of the whole narcissistic spectrum. Are they using power to silence criticism? These are questions that institutions can investigate. The question is not can we prove this person is the narcissist, inverted commas, or can we establish that this behaviour occurred, that it caused harm, and that it now must be corrected. And then there is no physical, I'm not talking about any kind of physical harm or sexual abuse or physical abuse here at all. I'm factoring that out of this discussion. The importance of early correction. This is one of the most important conclusions of this paper. Harmful behaviour should be corrected as early as possible, not punished recklessly, because I believe in restorative justice, not judged without evidence, but corrected early. And, because if manipulation works repeatedly, what is the lesson? If intimidation works repeatedly, what is the lesson? If retaliation works repeatedly, what is the lesson? If somebody repeatedly gains advantage and suffers no meaningful consequences, the message is very clear. The behaviour works, or indeed is supported by the organisation. And behaviour that works may be reinforced and said to be correct. It's not just reinforced, but it's right. It's right. So the person believes, because their behaviour is not challenged, that what they're doing is right, inverted commas. And this is very problematic. This is where the paper introduces what I call the power reinforcement hypothesis. Where narcissistic, vindictive, exploitative, or even sadistic behaviour repeatedly produces advantage under conditions of increasing power and weak accountability, these behaviours may become more persistent and more difficult to correct. Can these behaviours become more entrenched over time? This is something I'm very interested in, is the time dimension here. This paper then goes a step further based on previous research on what called the deformation of a narcissistic. It's brilliant the way I did it. And it's got quite a lot of, I'm sorry if I'm overestimating myself. So the paper that goes a step further, it asks whether years of reinforcement may contribute to a more deeply entrenched pattern. This is presented as a hypothesis for future research, not as an established conclusion, but it is an important question. What happens when somebody spends 10, 15, or 20 years experiencing this is all these, these people, in powerful positions, greater authority, greater status, successful retaliation, very little contradiction or criticism, weak sanctions, and increasing insulation from ordinary corrective feedback. We'd see that in an ivory tower. People living in an ivory tower of power and all of this. Do existing tendencies simply continue, or can they become more intense, more habitual, and more deeply consolidated? The paper proposes the personality consolidation hypothesis. I've written about this before. The possible progression is existing tendencies that goes to harmful behaviour, that brings success, that brings greater power, less honest feedback, greater entitlement, more severe behaviour, further success consolidation. So I've written a paper about that that's been read quite a bit. This means that time becomes very important. A harmful pattern corrected after a few months is not necessarily the same as one allowed to operate successfully for 10 years. Fear, silence, and the culture around power. Another major part of the paper concerns fear. If people observe that criticism of a powerful individual tends to exclusion, reputational attack, loss of opportunity, workplace difficulty, or other disadvantage, what will they do normally? Most or many, 99.9%, bar myself, will stay silent. And that silence can easily be misinterpreted. An institution may conclude there are very few complaints, so there can't be much of a problem. She's the problem because she's the only one complaining. She's the complainer because she's now, she's the complainer. She's the one on the that put her life on at risk by challenging the Supreme Court. And the exactly the as I understand it, the state were saying, instead of saying I was a challenger, they kept saying I was a complainer, you see. So it was very good. You see, it was a great code to the judge. This one is a complainer, i.e., knock her down, knock her down. So, it was a horrific thing to describe me as a complainant. I wasn't a complainant. I challenged the state on a particular issue, which you see, they were playing games, playing mind games, in my opinion, allegedly, the state saying I was a complainer. I'm a complainer about wrongdoing. And I research wrongdoing, therefore I'm a complainer. But research whistleblower, that's only one of many areas that I research. So it would be dismissing my intellect by saying I'm just a researcher or whistleblower, grossly minimizing my intellect. But this paper argues that silence is not necessarily evidence of consent. It may be evidence of fear. I mean, it's huge. I was at a think tank talk recently, and a particular person was talking about the culture of fear in our Irish society. And I mean, he articulated very well, and it resonated with my own. This was an independent view about the culture of fear everywhere in Ireland, and this is why it is. It's the retaliation for speaking out or speaking truth to power. This is particularly important where the culture itself has already adapted to the behaviour. Aggression may become described as strong leadership, or passive aggression. Manipulation becomes organisational politics. Vindictiveness, see the way the language changes. Vindictiveness becomes toughness. Cruelty becomes high standards. Criticism becomes disloyalty. At that point, the behaviour is no longer simply occurring inside the culture. It may be beginning to shape the culture itself. And this is one of my favourite papers, A Culture of Cruelty. I refer in the paper to an article I've long regarded as particularly striking, The Guardian discussion of a culture of cruelty in higher education. That phrase captures something important. The question is no longer why is one person behaving cruelly. It becomes what kind of culture allows cruelty to flourish, and what happens when everyone learns that challenging it is dangerous. This is highly relevant